They were growing where no winter bloom should. A dozen blue roses pinned to crevices of pale stone that drank the last light out of the Dornish evening. Lyanna had insisted on planting them herself in shallow pockets of soil carried up the mountain by the armsmen. Ungentle as that was for a lady meant to be hidden, the Tower of Joy was built like a crown cast down upon a barren brow, and the wind that combed it smelled of sun-baked rock and old rain. When the petals trembled, they sounded like thin silk. "Stubborn things," she said, crouching to thumb a curl of leaf. "I did not think they would take." "They took because you told them to," Ser Arthur Dayne replied, his voice mild as the dusk. "Some things thrive when ordered. The sun, for instance. The stars. Kings." Lyanna looked up at him and snorted. "Kings? Tell the sun it burns too bright and see if it listens." Ser Arthur smiled and glanced to the archway where Rhaegar stood with one hand on the sandstone, listening. He had come out without his cloak, and the scant breeze lifted his silver hair. He wore his plainest black, the one that made his throat look slender and delicate and his eyes the color of old iron. The prince moved like a man who had grown used to listening to echoes. He moved as if every corridor answered him, as if stone could be persuaded to offer counsel. "The sun listens to no one, my lady," he said. "But kings must. They must if they wish to keep their heads," she replied. His eyes warmed, and the receiving smile, that quietly beautiful thing he never spent in court, showed. "Yes," he said, "and yet I have not been listening." He had been absent for days, in the tower's highest room with the harp that ate his sleep and the scrolls that ate his meals. Sometimes he sang to keep his doubts from breeding. Lyanna knew the sound of those doubts by now. Small, sharp notes, like frost forming. "Then hear this," she said, rising. "I smell a storm." "Dorne has so few," Arthur murmured. "Not the sky's kind," said Lyanna. "Men, swords, oath-broken words. My father will be riding. Brandon will be riding twice as fast. They will look for you in the capital and find you here in stories. And stories are kinder than my father. He lives on the cool edge of the blade." Rhaegar's hand tightened on the stone. Arthur's mouth shifted in the shadow of a frown, no more than a passing cloud across a mountaintop. "What is said below?" Rhaegar asked, soft. "What news rides the sands?" "The riders that came this morning were half dead and wholly frightened," Arthur answered. "They said Brandon Stark burst into the Red Keep with steel and fury and demanded your head. Aerys took his, or tried." Lyanna's stomach dropped and then seized. "Tried?" "He clapped Brandon in irons and sent to Winterfell for Lord Rhaegar to answer for his son," Arthur said. "The king has asked for justice as a man asks to pour oil upon a stuck lock. When the oil comes, he will set it aflame." Rhaegar stepped forward and the evening light found the hollows beneath his eyes. "No," he said, almost to himself. "No. You told me once that you saw a city burning in a dream," Lyanna said. "Do not let the waking world make a liar of you." He looked at her then, and she knew he had already decided, because fear lit him from the inside like a candle in a thin latticed lantern. He was not the sort to thrill at risk. His courage had always been of colder water, the kind that made a man put a broken bone back under his flesh and keep walking. He would go to King's Landing not because songs would praise him for it, but because he could not carry another death. "You must remain," he said, "for a little while only until the city is steadied. The King's Guard will keep you safe." Lyanna laughed, short and harsh. "Ser Arthur and his white shadows will keep me from tripping on the last stair, but they will not keep my name from galloping. I am no prisoner here, and no delicate secret. If you face them without me, the tale will be written by every mouth that hates you, and my father will not read the footnotes." Arthur's eyebrows flickered, just once. Rhaegar's hand rose, hovered, and fell. Elia is kinder than stories allow," Lyanna said. "When she met me, she did not look for a rival. She looked for a woman who could ride as she never learned to, who might love what she could not. She sees your cares like a rain sees a roof. Do not hide behind her." Rhaegar looked at Arthur. "If the king is to be faced," the sword of the morning said, Better 2 hearts than 1. He meant more than hearts. Rhaegar heard it. Lyanna saw it cross his face like the shadow of a passing raptor. The knowledge that if he walked into the Red Keep with a northern maid beside him who looked him in the eye and did not flinch, some of his enemies would forget their daggers long enough to recall their honor. She would be a banner he had not earned but badly needed. "Then we ride," Rhaegar said. "We ride tonight." They went down among the torches. Oswell had the horses already stamped and saddled. All that white silk turned war. Gerald Hightower's jaw could have struck sparks against itself. He hated a hasty plan, and he hated more the shape this one took. But he did not witlessly rebuke it. He stood at the lower gate with his palm against the warm stone, as if he could keep the whole mountain from sliding. When Lyanna came to him, she saw the years in his face as striations in marble, time's patient chisels. He bowed as if she were already crowned. "My lady," he said, "you honor us." "I am riding because I do not like what honor does when left alone," she said. "Do not make me sorry." His mouth twitched. If the Hightower smiled, it was always an endangered thing.
"I seldom do."
They rode into the desert night with a cold sky and a hot ground. The stars like ice seeds scattered across a black field. The Tower of Joy receded to a narrow finger pricking the moon.
Lyanna pear.
Essayed her winter roses into the straw of her saddlebags to keep them whole. She felt the rhythm of the horse up into her chest and let it settle her bones where fear went to gnaw. At dawn's brittle edge they reached the river road and turned north. By noon, the red mountains softened. By evening, the marches rose with their thorny hedges and their mistrust. The Kingsguard rode in silence, a sound like snow falling. Rhaegar sometimes sang under his breath, notes too thin for anyone but Lyanna to hear. She liked those better than the harp's polished grief. They were true in a way the court never was. On the 3rd day they found a troop of royal riders on the road, bearing the black and scarlet of the hand. The man at their head was lean enough to be a long blade and as humorless. Lord John Connington removed his helm and bowed, red hair matted by sweat, blue eyes watchful. "Prince," he said cool, "we feared you were lost to study." "I am lost to nothing that burns men for speaking," Rhaegar said. "Who told me?" Connington's mouth thinned. "The king has taken Lord Brandon Stark and several of his companions for treason. He sent for Lord Rhaegar. He speaks of the ancient right, of fire and champions. The small folk speak too. They say wolves are howling so loud in the far north that children wake spilling their supper. Then we must muzzle a dragon before he burns his own keepers," Rhaegar said. Connington's gaze slid to Lyanna, and in that moment he became a man and not a function. Surprise, and something like pity, moved across his countenance. "Lady Lyanna," he said. "Lord Connington," she replied. "Best you are not seen until the prince decides how to present you," he said. He meant it well. Lyanna thought of all the men who had tried to pack her into a trunk of their choosing and send her to a destination of their design. She could have told Connington that she had stepped out of every such box with a blade. "I am not hair and feathers stitched to his cloak," she said. "If I am to be seen at all, it must be like this." Connington bowed his acknowledgement, but these were games of chess pieces and he had not liked losing any. That showed too. King's Landing smelled the way it always had, like boiled bones and tanner's piss and the honeyed treacle of decay. The sprawl of the city huddled around the hill, the Red Keep scabbed upon it. Rhaegar looked up at it and seemed, for an instant, small. Lyanna's hand went to his wrist and found pulse. The magnitude of kingship is not the keeping of a crown, she thought, but the keeping of breath when every window smells of smoke. They rode up through the city beneath small folk eyes. Some spat, some stared, slack, their faces buttersoft with wonder. Some called Rhaegar's name as if they were tossing him bread. Lyanna met their gazes levelly. She saw tired women with children like knotted aprons at their skirts. She saw apprentices with scarred arms, men whose hands were permanently curled by work. She saw a boy in a greased cap lift a wooden sword and salute, quick and shy. She tipped 2 fingers off her brow, and the boy's grin split like a ripe fruit. At the gate, the gold cloaks were double-ranked. and the gate captain's knuckles were white on his halberd as the Kingsguard came through. They skittered aside like minnows for a shark. Inside the second gate, Varys waited in dove gray with his hands folded, his face composed into a hole he could sell by the inch. "My prince," he said, "the king is in the Hall of 1,000 Candles with Lord Rhaegar Stark and his son. The room is as full of lords as a wasp's nest is of wasps. He announces a trial by fire." Rhaegar's jaw grew tighter until Lyanna thought it would crack. "Burn no one today," Rhaegar said. Varys bowed. "Would that I could promise." "You can," Rhaegar said. "Where is Barristan?" "On the steps with Lord Dane and Lord Hightower," said Varys. "Jaime Lannister is with the king." Lyanna felt the name like a thrown pebble. It was not the boy's fault that he had been made pretty in gold and wrapped in white so early. He would be the hand that did what men twice his age could not live with. She prayed, in a sudden flare, that he would not be asked to choose between oath and life before he had even learned what his own laugh sounded like on a dark road. The great doors of the throne room stood open. That room always seemed built for winter no matter the season. Drafts slid along its floor as patient as hounds. Firelight from the braziers shook and stretched and made knives of every shadow. On the throne itself sat Aerys, hair like a white flare, beard stained, eyes glittering with a madman's private stars. Fire did live in him. Lyanna saw that. Not the clean, violent thing that cleared a field, but something that clung and would not be scraped from the bones once it found them. Lord Rhaegar Stark stood straight as the spear he had carried in youth. Beside him, Brandon in chains still looked young enough to ride a horse after he was told not to. His eyes, when they found Lyanna at Rhaegar's shoulder, did a queer thing. Rage gathered, then fear swamped it, then relief like a river bursting a dam. He made a sound that might have been her name and might have been the name of their mother, both at once. "Majesty," Rhaegar said, stepping forward up the center aisle, voice carrying like harp notes, pure as water. "This must stop." The throne room rustled. Barristan Selmy's weathered face turned a notch toward them. Arthur Dane eased half a step to block a flanking rout. The White Bull came forward, his bulk a wall. "Prince," Aerys crooned. "Prince, there you are, my bright boy. They said you were reading. They said you were singing. And all the while wolves came to tear down my palace." "The wolves came to demand your son," Rhaegar said. "They came to demand your head," Aerys screamed, the sound a kettle coming to boil. "The boy barked like a cur before the gates. He named you thief and kidnapper, and I will show him that only one steals here." He gestured. A brazier was drawn forward, and then something else. An apparatus of iron, cruel and elegant, as if a torturer had been given a sculptor's budget. Lyanna had heard of this thing, dreamed of it with sweat down her back. The pyromancer who trundled it had the pallor of those who never saw open sky. "We will honor the old ways," Aerys purred. "A trial by fire. Let Lord Rhaegar be the champion of his house. He shall burn for his son." Rhaegar moved before he realized his legs had done it. He put himself between the throne and the Stark men. The hall breathed in. The Mad King laughed high and thin. Rhaegar imposed absolute stillness upon himself and knew that any noise he made might cleave the day. "Father," he said, "you cannot." "I am the law," Aerys said. "You are king," Rhaegar said, very soft. "The law is older than you." "What do you know of the law?" Aerys spat. "You know songs and whores and riddles you learned from dead books. Do you know what it is to watch the city rot? To watch traitors fatten themselves on my wine?" He lurched up from the throne, hands clawing the air. Jaime Lannister's face went still as ice and then thawed into alarm. Rhaegar's gaze slid from his father to the boy and saw the course that lay like a knife edge. The wildfire under the city, the jars stacked like a dragon's hoard, the order forming in Aerys's mouth. "Burn them all." He moved. He did not draw. That would have been an ending. He mounted the dais in 2 strides and set his hand upon the king's mouth. Aerys bit him. In the same heartbeat, the White Bull's gauntlet came down on Aerys's wrist and Arthur's blade whispered out and met the point of the crown's scepter with a kiss that knocked it spinning. Fire licked the brazier. Barristan stepped into its light. The hall had time to choose what it would be remembered for. For the realm, Rhaegar said. His father thrashed against his hand like a netted fish. His teeth sank deeper into the flesh of Rhaegar's palm. Blood ran. Rhaegar did not move. Jaime, he said. The boy had frozen halfway between sword and shame. Open the doors. Call the High Septon. Summon Lords Stark and Connington. Let the realm look upon this with eyes that bear witness. No fires today. No fires. Jaime obeyed. He was very young. He would be very old later when he remembered walking from the throne toward the bright air of the hall with all those eyes on him. Aerys spat blood and bit again. Rhaegar tasted iron in his own mouth, as if hurt could travel between them. The king threw his last words against Rhaegar's skin, and those words were the marrow of his madness. Burn, he hissed. Burn them. No, Rhaegar said into his face, and for the first time since boyhood, his father flinched from him. It did not become clean after that. Such things never do. The High Septon came dragging sanctity and Florence oil and tried to glue it onto a moment made of broken bones. Lords muttered and reckoned and reshuffled their weight upon their heels. Varys watched with his soft hands at rest and his eyes counting. But the brazier was drawn away. The iron apparatus was rolled back toward the shadows. The pyromancers retreated with their pale faces and their hunger for praise. Rickard Stark set his hand upon his son's arm, and Brandon's mouth trembled and did not. Lyanna thought of a winter in Winterfell when Brandon had stolen her glove and stuck it upon their father's spear and then stabbed Snow with it until he could make her laugh. He had never minded being hated by those he once made laugh. He minded this. Rhaegar stood with his hand leaking, and the blood hit the stones and spread into stubborn flower shapes. The High Septon droned. Aerys was lifted, gently, incredibly, and escorted not to his rooms but to his tower, as if towers could contain such fires. The court exhaled. The city below was saved from an order that had not been given. The city would never know what had been within a breath of being given. "Your Grace," said Arthur quietly, when the doors had shut and the last murmurer had gone. He said it as if it had always been so. "No," Rhaegar said. He lifted his head like a swimmer and found Lyanna. She had not moved since he stepped. He found also, to his surprise, that he was on his knees. "No, not yet. Now," Jon Connington said, not unkindly. "Now or not at all." They made it a council and called it a vigil. The lords who stayed were those who had not yet chosen a new story for themselves. Tywin Lannister came into it silent as a blade, arrived without fanfare under a cloak the color of sober coin, as if he could be mistaken for any man. He had the face of one who had slept with his eyes open for 20 years and the patience of someone who had learned that waiting is a form of striking. "Lord Lannister," Rhaegar said. "Prince," Tywin replied. "Not yet," Rhaegar said, wry, and Tywin's eyes widened a fraction. The fraction was the measure by which a great house weighed advantage and found itself astonished by the balance. "We have a king," Tywin said after a beat. "We must have a realm. If only one may be saved today, choose." "Majesty." The High Septon breathed again, smelling faintly of honeyed wine and incense. "If the king is unwell." "He is mad," Rickard Stark said, as if describing a horse's temperament. "We have known it," said Varys, smooth. "We have loved him all the same." Tywin's mouth did something like pity and then stopped. "I will not speak long," the Lord of Casterly Rock said. "I came because I was told he reached for wildfire. I see a hand bandaged with his son's flesh. I see Lord Stark and Connington and Hightower and Dane. I see Ser Barristan's face when he believes he has failed. I see my own son shaken. I will not see King's Landing burn. If Prince Rhaegar means to hold it, I will hold with him. If not, I will go home and build higher walls." "Jaime should not be in white," Rhaegar said to him. "He should be at Casterly Rock, learning to wear your mantle." Tywin's expression did not change, but a string was plucked deep under it and hummed. "That is an argument for some other day." "It is the argument at the core," Rhaegar said. "What we make boys into to feed men's vows." "Prince," Barristan said, stepping forward. "We are speaking in circles because we are afraid to speak straight. The king must be separated from the throne." "The law?" the High Septon said again, weak as a receding tide. "A great council may sit a regent," Gerald Hightower said. "It has been done." "Not with a prince ready," said Rhaegar. He looked at Rhaegar as if he were a colt a Stark might buy. Head high, legs clean, spirit good, and a temper to be ridden rather than broken. "Say the word, boy." "I am not your boy," Rhaegar said, and then, "But I am your daughter's choice." Lyanna moved into the circle without realizing it. Men made space because she looked like a storm that did not see them. She stood with her hands empty and her chin up and her hair in 1,000 small rebellions. The hall stones, which had known many kinds of blood, recognized another shape of courage and adjusted their cool accordingly. "My father," she said, "my prince, lords, the songs will never tell the truth of this room. I will. The prince took me where I wished to go. He did not snatch me into his saddle like a thief. I held the reins. I hold them still." Ricard's head turned slowly, as if it weighed 100 years. "You are betrothed," he said. "I was," she said, "to a man whose laughter I loved and whose hand was too heavy for a life I wanted to live. I would have been a good wife to Robert because I am good at what I am told to do when it is right. This is not that. This is not theft or seduction. This is the choosing of two people who would change a fate made by fathers while drunk on winter ale." Ricard's mouth found a sternness that had held entire armies still. "What you want is not the law. What I want is a realm not gutted," she said. "The law can be mended on its bones. Men are bad menders once they are ash." It hung there, chiming lightly against each man's private instrument, setting each vibrating in its own way. What a daughter asked of a father in public. What a prince asked of a mad king in private. What a realm asked of itself when the thing it had believed about itself began to smell bad. "Burn no one today," Rhaegar said again, and it was more an oath than a plea. They made it as clean as men could. Ares was declared unfit by the High Septon in terms so mushy that they left no stain upon sanctity. A great council would be summoned to ratify the regency. In the meantime, the prince would govern. When this had been said in words and then in stone, Varys slipped away to scatter it to the corners of the city like seeds. Men went to their rooms to adjust their treasons. Ricard Stark put a hand on his daughter's shoulder and squeezed once, as if he were testing muscle, and then let it rest there as if muscle had answered him. That night Lyanna went to the godswood of the Red Keep, which was no godswood at all, an oak and a pool and no weirwood, no face carved by the first men's thumbs. It always smelled of unsubtle sap. She sat on a bench of cold marble as the city exhaled the day's almost catastrophe and let her thoughts go beneath the stones. The old gods did not come in words. They came in that small silence when even the air is careful. She knew Rhaegar would come. Silence tugged him as a river does a thirsty man. He sat beside her and said nothing. When he did speak, it was like a leaf falling. "Elia sent for you," he said. "She asked when you would come." "She asked," Lyanna said, and smiled without mirth. "I marvel er her." He had told her before, privately, where kindness had softened him, that Elia had observed them with more grace than either deserved. He had not gone looking for virtue in his wife and then had found it everywhere he looked. "We do not fit into each other as easily as songs would have it," he said. "But I would not have you fit easier. It would make you smaller." Lyanna laughed. Quiet. She thought of the blue roses laid into the tower, stubbornly catching on rock. "I do not fit anywhere," she said. "Not in Winterfell's quiet evenings. Not in a Dornish tower. Yet I would have a place that could stand my leaving and my return." He turned his mauled hand over in his lap and looked at it. "We will ride to Elia in the morning," he said. "She asked for you." Elia waited in a room hung with pale silks and heavy air. The windows were wide open and still the chamber trembled on the edge of heat. She stood when they entered and the fall of her gown made a soft rain sound. She was willow thin, her wrists too fine for the world, her eyes enormous, but behind their gentleness something lived that would not be frightened from its perch. She kissed Lyanna on both cheeks like a martel, and then took her hands in both of hers as if she would warm them. "Thank you," Elia said. "For what?" Lyanna asked, dumb. "For standing when men would have had you sit," Elia said. "For speaking when the room was too full of being spoken for. For saving my children from a fire their grandfather meant to make their cradle." Lyanna swallowed against the thought and found it would not be swallowed, would not be reduced. He would have burned them? Elia's mouth made a very small line. She did not answer the ugly question but went around it, as a woman skirts a puddle that might suck half her dress into itself. "Our houses have pulled at each other since the first spear was thrown at the neck of a dragon, and still we managed not to tear the realm's cloth," she said. "Now you ask us to stitch another seam into it. Many will say there is not enough cloth. They will speak of polygamy as if they have not read a history book." Rhaegar looked hurt. "I would never." Elia lifted her hand and touched the bruises at his knuckles. "Husband," she said, "I have no interest in pretending you did not take a second wife. I have interest only in the way that second wife looks at me when I open the door." Lyanna met her eyes. She had not known where her own fright would slop once the rooms had emptied. She had not known that it would be this, the fear that Elia would rightly hate her and softly kill a dozen things not yet born with that hatred. What she saw was not that. It was a woman who loved her children and loved her husband in the way a desert loves a river. Not owning it, but knowing what the land becomes without it. "I will not take anything from you," Lyanna said stiffly, and then laughed at herself. "As if I could take anything from a princess of Dorne. No, let me try again. Elia, I will not ask for what belongs to you. If I am to be queen beside you, I must be the sort that keeps watch while you sleep. The sort that brings your daughter a pony and teaches her to fall well as much as to sit proud." Elia's eyes warmed until Lyanna felt like the more delicate person. "If you try to take what is my daughter's, I will cut you," she said, and the words were a silk laid over steel. "If you keep what is given, I will give you more. If you can love my son as if he were your nephew and not your rival, we will live to see a day when no man remembers where one of us ended and the other began, and the realm will call that day fortunate." "Then let us begin," Rhaegar said, breath out like a prayer. "Elia, there will be a great council. It will declare me regent, and thereafter I mean to be crowned." "I cannot." "I will stand beside you," Elia said. "I am your wife." He hesitated, and both women saw and were already too wry to pretend they had not. "And Lyanna," he said. Elia tilted her head. Her earrings glinted like crescent moons. "My husband, two truths can be held at once. The faith will balk. The north will not. The realm does not yet know which of itself it will choose to be. Offer it a story that it can love. Crown me where the seven rule. Crown Lyanna where the old gods do." "There is no heart tree in King's Landing," Lyanna said softly. Elia smiled. "The Riverlands have them. Riverrun will soon enough be family. Let us begin there." Ricard and Hoster had once mapped out marriages like campaigns. The map must be redrawn without blood if it could be. The next days were occupied by a kind of warfare that left the stones cleaner. Meetings that smelled of old wine and old oaths, corridors thick with intention. Ned came from the Riverlands with his father. Lyanna saw him cross the yard as if a long winter had weighed each step, and he lifted his eyes to her and broke into the smallest smile she had ever prized from anyone. He took her into his arms before he looked at the prince, and when he released her, his hands flexed as if they could not quite accept that touch had been permitted. "Brandon will shout," he said, as a man might describe weather. "Father will not." "Brandon has already shouted," she said, which made a corner of his mouth soften. "I missed your grunts." "I missed you," he said. "Do not die in a way that makes Mother angry with me for a decade." "We do not know if there is a way to die that does not make Mother angry," Lyanna said. "Be safe. Marry a woman who can stand on her own feet." Ned's eyes flicked to the corridor where Ashera Dane had just passed, sun on her dark hair like a benediction. He went pink and grave all at once, as if some internal judge had slapped down his pleasure and told it to sit on its hands. I fear our father believes I am already promised to Lisa Tully, he said. Father believes a great many things, Lyanna said. Elia believes two truths may be held at once. I begin to love her. Then I shall fear her, Ned said, and she laughed into his shoulder. Robert Baratheon arrived last, because of course he did. He came like a storm with 20 banners and 200 thirsty men and a song on his lips to make the gate guards grin. When he was told Lyanna lived and stood beside the prince as his chosen, he laughed, because men wrestle grief until it tires, and sometimes laughter is what you do when it lets go. Then he drank. Then he broke a bench when he set his cup down too hard. They brought him into a small chamber with a window and a view of the city's red roofs. He smelled like the road and glory. He held nothing in his hand because he would have crushed it. Lyanna came in without fuss and shut the door and leaned against it, as if the wood could hold back a wave if it knew it must. Lya, Robert said, and all his sighs fell away, and all his beauty became the sort that hurts people. Rob, she said, because she could not call him Robert in private and pretend the world had not been simpler once. You ran off, he said wonderingly. You, as if the person who had jumped a horse across a frozen river to prove a point in one winter of their childhood were not the same person. With him. I went, she said. With him. All the same to me, he answered. And all one to the men who would have followed me into the fire. All one but wrong, she said. I would have become something I could not have borne, Robert. I am sorry. I am not sorry. Those truths must live beside each other until they learn not to quarrel. He glared at the floor for a long time, and when he raised his head she thought for a terrible instant that he would be foolish. He would choose to be the kind of man who kills for hurts and then has no words for the mess he has made. But the storm had a shore somewhere inside him. It always had. Ned had found it often enough in boys' rooms and training yards and pulled him back. Now, the shore was the shape of Lyanna's face and the eyes that could not take softness for an answer. If he hurts you, he said, in a voice that had broken Riv. Heirs, I will smash his face. If he hurts me, Lyanna said, I will do it myself. He barked a laugh, broke on it. I would have given you everything I had. You would have given me everything you had and then asked it to be what you needed, she said. It was never a crime. It was a boy's love put in a man's arms too soon. She stepped forward, touched his sleeve. You may hate him in private. In public, do not burn the city to hunt the moon. Swear your sword to the realm, Robert. Swear it now and swallow the noise that comes with the swallowing. He watched her thumb worrying the wool of his sleeve. He watched his own breath take him out to sea and back again. He shut his eyes and flung his enormous hand up and caught hers as if it were a falling thing. He stood like that a long moment, both of them holding to a piece of rope. I will not kill him, he said. I will not raise banners. I will go home and take my ale in the yard and break 5 benches before I let one word out that starts a fire. She nodded. It was the best could be asked. It was better than most men gave when their pride throbbed like a wound. Take a wife, she said. One that is not me. One who will survive you. He flinched as if she had struck him, then nodded once, curt as a seal broken on a letter. I hear there is a lioness in need of a crown, he said. If I cannot have yours, you may have Cersei Lannister, she said drily. And may the 7 bless your patience. May they bless my aim, he said with a shadow of the old grin, and she found herself laughing despite the ache in the laugh. The great council convened in a hall that had watched dragons breathe and kings weep. The benches smelled of men who had sweated in fear upon them across centuries. Varys had been tireless and Jon Arryn cunning. Hoster Tully had fixed his wide smile and asked for lists and left a trail of favors like crumbs. The High Septon came and took the largest seat as if he had grown it from his own flesh. Lords came with their banners and their private histories and their sons. Doran Martell could not leave Sunspear, but Oberyn came embalmed in the sense of Dorne and danger. Tywin came and sat like a statue put in place by carpenters who had grown old at the job. Ricard and Brandon and Ned came. Robert Baratheon did not. And the murmurs that rolled like rooks were not displeasure so much as disappointment. It would have made a better song if he had come to roar and been soothed. Rhaegar stood and spoke. He did it without a harp, and thus men listened the way men listen when something walks without its usual crutches. He unrolled no prophecies. He laid out roads and the necessity of building them. He named the jars of wildfire beneath the city in a voice that did not flinch and told them how close last week had been to a history that would have salted their sons. He did not use the word madness. He said instead, "My father is unwell and unsuited to the task." He named his own faults and did not bother to pretend away the presence of a northern girl beside him. He called Elia Martell by her titles. He called Lyanna Stark by her name. He said he asked for regency until such time as the realm was safe and the king could be retired without riot. He said he asked for his blood to be given the work that had been his since the cradle. Then he sat, and the room became a forge. Words hammered words. Intentions changed color under heat. When the vote came, the realm did what it had always done when faced with a choice between habit and survival. It smuggled habit beneath its coat and voted for survival. Rhaegar was named regent. Aerys was confined. Men breathed out disbelief and then wonder at their own lives, because they were not dead. The High Septon smeared oil upon Rhaegar's brow and Elias and declared a coronation to come. He did not know where to place Lyanna, and so he blessed her foreheads with the Seven's oil with courteous bewilderment and pretended that was sufficient. The songs would later wash the edges smooth. They rode to Riverrun after, as Elia had said. The gods would there had a heart tree old enough to have seen men without iron, perhaps. Its carved face had been worn to benevolence by the grindstone of centuries. It watched them come without comment. Hoster Tully adored his banners. He had dressed them all afternoon. The Blackfish stood at his shoulder with the sort of good humor that comes of having nothing left to prove to anyone. He had a wink ready for Lyanna and a nod for Elia and a bow for the prince, as if he enjoyed formalities only in order to puncture them when they were most inflated. The northern lords had ridden down for it, curious and half ashamed of their curiosity. They watched as the old gods named Lyanna queen with silence and leaves and a wind that came across the pool and lifted her hair like a benediction. Rhaegar did not set a crown upon her head here. He took her hand and held it. He looked at the face carved in the wood and said nothing. He looked at the men from the Vale and the Reach and the river and let them fill the rest with their own stories. It is easier to forgive what you invent. When it was done, Ned drew his knife and cut a slice of bark and let his blood well and offered it to the tree's mouth. Brandon did the same in a show of family theater he knew would fetch a gasp from the southern onlookers, then grinned at them all. Ricard watched his children with a calculus the weirwood could not help him with. In his eyes, Rhaegar saw the shape of 10 decisions. "I will hold you to your word," Ricard said at last. "You will not burn men. You will not make oaths you cannot keep and ask me to glue them back together for my grandchildren. You will not let softness in yourself be mistaken for weakness in the crown." "I will not burn men," Rhaegar said. "I will not make oaths I cannot keep. As for softness..." He looked at Lyanna, who had dried tears on her cheek and did not pee. Red end otherwise. "I have learned that hardness fails where patience does not." Ricard grunted, which in a Stark meant approval that had been sanded smooth by suspicion. He put his hand out. Rhaegar took it. In that clasp the rebellion that might have been was soothed back into the ground. Not killed, never killed, merely fed to roots that would use it to make leaves. The days that followed were work. They tasted of ink and saddle and the last mouthful of water before the canteen runs dry. Rhaegar built a small council for men who had not yet failed at the thing they loved. Tywin took up the coin again with a cold delight. Barristan stood for the Kingsguard with honor like a polished helm. Varys whispered and then, more and more, found he did not need to. Jon Arryn came to the city and did not bring banners. He brought good sense. Stannis Baratheon, who had a face like an accusation even in his sleep, came to represent his brother and remained at the King's Harbor with a scowl that Rhaegar found oddly comforting. Men who had not been allowed to speak in rooms for years found that they could. Men who had learned that they would not be listened to unless they said something more sensible than yesterday's echo. Lyanna assumed no office and yet made one by walking the places where wind got in. She learned the names of the kitchen girls who had calluses like coins. She rode each week at first light with the city watch so she could see where the rats were worst. She went to the Street of the Sisters and the Street of Silk and listened without the condescension of a fat purse. She asked Elia if it would offend to take Rhaenys down to the yards to watch the boys train, and then did. And when the boys jeered a princess come to see them sweat, Rhaenys climbed the rail and jeered them back so cleverly that half the insults made even the swordmasters laugh. Lyanna arranged for 2 northern girls who had come south with a cook to be placed in the keep stables because they could ride better than the men there. She set them to teach, and when the first stable hand found himself thrown twice in front of his friends and laughed instead of snarled, Lyanna believed something in the place had turned. At night she and Elia took turns sitting up with Rhaenys when she had a fever and the boy Aegon when he cut teeth. They learned to argue without anger and to concede without keeping count. Elia taught Lyanna to hold a fan so that its motion let one speak cruelly and be forgiven for it. Lyanna taught Elia to climb onto a mare in a dress and then to fall and to laugh. They came, one day, upon Jaime Lannister asleep in a chair outside Aerys' door, hilt in hand and head nodding. Elia set a cushion under the boy's shoulder and Lyanna tucked a blanket around his knees, as if he were not the prettiest danger any of them had seen. Aerys muttered behind the door. Sometimes his voice rose so high it cracked and men outside wished to smash their ears. Sometimes a silence fell that felt like a held breath in a city that had learned to fear held breaths. Once, Rhaella sent for Lyanna, and Lyanna went into a room that smelled strongly of lavender and secrets. The queen looked as if a wind had come often through her and left her empty. But when she reached for Lyanna's hand, her fingers were strong. "They say you ride too hard for the child," Rhaella said. Lyanna's hand went to her belly without permission. Its seas had been quiet for days. When she said to herself child, the word did not echo. It had not quickened. It might not. She had not known which grief she had prepositioned herself for, and she found that knowing did not help. "I am careful," Lyanna lied gently. "Be uncareful," Rhaella said, and it startled both of them into chuckles. "Be yourself, child. The gods did not make you to creep carefully across a room." She smoothed Lyanna's hair once, as if smoothing a bed just vacated. "I have been queen so long I cannot remember what a day without watching feels like. I would like to watch you to rest," she said. "If it must be you." Lyanna kissed the queen's hand. "It must be me," she said, and believed it. Peace does not sing the way war does. It hums, and men who have learned to crave symbols call it small. But the hum grew. Roads were repaired. A new levy was written for the city that required men to be chosen for the watch by competence rather than favor. A law regularized the price of bread to a narrow band to stop bakers from becoming lords and lords from becoming bakers. The wildfire jars were quietly removed from beneath the city with the pyromancer's cooperation and Rhaegar's bruised smile. There were still duels and stupidities. There were still men who slapped the backsides of girls in kitchens and were sent to the yard to learn better hands. But the air thinned. The city breathed differently. There were disputes too. The Faith muttered that Lyanna had been crowned where no oil had touched her brow. A small treatise was commissioned from an agreeable septon to demonstrate that piety took many flavors and that one could be married before 2 altars if one did not mind making one's grandchildren clever. In the Vale, Jon Arryn married Lisa Tully and never knew if his bed contained love or only strategy. He wrote to Ned as if asking advice, and Ned sent him jokes. In the Stormlands, Robert drank himself into a scar and then out of it, married Cersei Lannister in a blaze of cloth and wine, and woke the next morning to a wife who would not be won by mood. If she did not love him, she could rule with him, and if she could not rule with him, she would rule around him. Stannis watched all this and learned a lesson he did not yet know how to apply. In Dorne, Oberyn sent Lyanna a letter so beautifully filthy that she read it to Elia and they both laughed until tears came, then burned it in a censer because some jokes can only live once. Doran sent a basket of blood oranges and a quiet warning. The sand split. Turs in the deep desert had been bold lately, and boldness in the desert sometimes presaged boldness at sea. Lyanna took this to Stannis, who took it to the captains, and a treaty was struck with certain smugglers whose honesty could be bought in a way a noble's indignation could not. When Balon Greyjoy began to mutter into his cups about his own crown, he found, months later, that every cove he had planned to use for quiet was already watched. It took him a long time to realize that a woman with blue roses in her hair had marked the map. The day Lyanna learned the child was gone was the day the city learned the smell the sky makes just before rain. She bled and bled, and at the end of it she lay quieter than a body and listened to Elia's careful and nothing words. Rhaegar sat with his harp and never touched it. When he did speak, he said only, "I am sorry," as if it were a thing he had broken with his bare hands. She patted his knee and said, "Do not be foolish." But later she found the god's wood and pressed her face into the bench and bit wood until her mouth tasted of sap. The old gods did not tell her it would be all right. They let her remember that winter is a part of the world. When she rose, she found Benjen Stark waiting in the shade. He had come south with the northern lords and lingered, because boys linger near fire without knowing until their hair smells of smoke. He looked at her with a face still under construction and said, shy and fierce, "I am going to the wall, Lya." He said it like a gift. "Because songs live there?" she asked, wiping at her mouth. "Because no one looks at you like a candle," he said. "Because I am good at being cold. Because someone must go who does not think it is a punishment." She thought of the dreams that had begun to come to Rhaegar again now that the city's hum had steadied into a sound between lullaby and warning. He had not told many men that Long's nights had pressed into his sleep and left ice on the room's edges. He had spoken to her and to the heart tree and to Maester Pycelle, who listened with professional courtesy but no bone-deep belief. She had told Rhaegar, "Send men north who will not laugh when old stories stir." "Go," she said to Benjen. "Go and write me letters that are mostly drawings." His grin woke itself, blew through his worry, and for a moment he was the little boy who had tripped and skinned both knees and laughed so that their mother had not been able to scold even when she tried. He hugged her hard, bumped her ribs, and went. Later, a raven brought a smudged sketch of a wall and a smear that might be Benjen and might be a crow. Lyanna did not expect another child and then found herself carrying one as if the old gods had decided to be contrary. She told Elia first. Elia's hands went to Lyanna's belly with a gentleness that made Lyanna catch her lip between her teeth to keep from crying. "This is good," Elia said. "This is not ode. It is simply good." Rhaegar stared like a man who dares not brush ash off his lap lest he reveal that the fire is past. He came to himself and sang once in the god's wood until Lyanna told him to stop because it made the birds nervous. This child came late and quiet and with a shock of black hair that refused to lie down even when the nurse laid a damp cloth upon it. He looked at the world with old eyes, as some babies do, as if he had been brought back to the same place twice and found it amusing. Elia held him and said, "You have given the north a prince." Lyanna held him and thought, "The realm has given itself a knot that, if pulled carefully, will keep. What shall we call him?" Rhaegar asked, eyes far at the edge of some thought. Lyanna thought of the old kings who had ruled without burning things, of the boy she wanted this child to be. Able to laugh, able to be serious without making other people feel small. She thought of the old brothers in the crypt beneath Winterfell and of a man she had grown up watching turn the world over in his hands until he knew which side to put down. "Jaehaerys is a large name," she said. "Aemon is wise and doomed. I would spare him both those weights." "Jon," Rhaegar said then, not looking at her, but rather past her, toward the piece of sky the window gave them. "Jon, for the man who taught me to count coins as if they were oaths. For the friend I never had and should have." Lyanna blinked and laughed. "He is not yours to name after a lord you like," she said. "He is mine to name after a brother I love." "Then let us share," Rhaegar said, and that became the first of 100 shared things. "Jon," he said to the child. "Jon'll, if you prefer a Stark's memory. Jon, if you prefer mine." Lyanna kissed the baby's wild hair and thought, with a pang both sweet and painful, that she would have called him that in any world. Years pass even in peace, perhaps especially. You must keep turning them like a spit. The boy grew, as Rhaenys and Aegon had grown, on a diet of blunt truth and careful lies. He learned to say please to cooks and took his first fall in the yard with all the pride knocked out of him and stood with dirt in his mouth and laughed. He discovered the godswood and made a friend of silence. Elia taught him how to think his way around a room without moving. Lyanna taught him to move through the room in a way that made the room love him for the trouble. Rhaegar taught him songs and, more importantly, how to listen to ones he had not asked to hear. He met Robert Baratheon on the steps of the September when he was 4 and decided that the Storm Lord was a wonderful tree for climbing. Robert lifted him with a laugh that had become gentler, as if his chest no longer made its own thunder. Cersei stood beside Robert with cool eyes and a dress that looked like armor. She watched the boy and saw in him not a rival but a mirror she could use to check her smile. Jon asked if he could touch her hair, and she told him no and then crouched and let him hold the end of it anyway, and she laughed when he said it looked like sunshine that had gotten tired and wanted to be a ribbon. Aerys died in his tower one night in his sleep, which felt like a trick. Jaime Lannister wept for him and could not have said why for his life. Rhaella wore white and looked as if she had finally been allowed to set down a pail she had been carrying since she was 14. The city woke in the morning and did not burn. The bells rang in a pattern the small folk had not heard in their whole lives. Neither alarm nor victory, just news. The great September of Baelor filled with candles. The old king was borne down the hill under a pall that had been woven when he was still a gentle boy. It smelled faintly of cedar and patience. The coronation was not what songs said either. It did not glitter so much as glow. Light on gold, light on faces, light on a white cloak set upon Jaime's shoulders by Barristan's hand with something like pride this time, because the boy had done the ugliness of endurance without reward and had not bragged of it. Elia stood with her hand upon her son's head because he would wriggle otherwise. Lyanna stood with a winter rose at her breast and realized, in a dizzy moment, that she loved this sweaty, imperfect city. This place that smelled of things she had spent youth disdaining. She loved it because people were in it, and because people could be altered by a steady hand. Not every danger could be coaxed into good behavior. In the far north, Benjen's letters began to change. The drawings grew stranger. Figures like tall men with edges like glass. A wind that cut the page in his description. Rhaegar read them and pressed the paper and sent good boots and warm cloaks and twice the food the watch had asked for. He sent builders north to shore up towers that had started to sulk in their old age. He sent men with eyes that did not learn to wink at nonsense. He told Lyanna that the dreams had come again. A wall of night and a song that must be sung by more than one voice. She put her hand in his, and they did not speak words like destiny aloud, because those words make cowards of men and steel of women. They spoke instead of roads, again, of grain, of how to make a realm want to live long enough to see a winter break. A raven brought a letter one night when snow fell on King's Landing for the first time in a quiet decade. It was from Benjen, but the hand was not cheerful. The night is long, he wrote. There are things that do not care for our banners. Send me men. Send me steel that has been tasted by sorcery and tamed by old songs. Send me stories to tell to boys who cannot sleep for fear of the noises in the woods. Lyanna took the letter to Rhaegar and then to the small council. Tywin's mouth made that flicker that came when confronted with a problem that could not be bribed. Jon Arryn's face tilted toward a sense he could not weigh with a scale. Stannis's jaw worked because he liked anything that smelled like duty even when it came on rotten wind. Varys's eyes hooded. It is difficult to bribe a ghost. We will send what the North asks, Rhaegar said, and we will send the prince. Elaya's head snapped like a pennant. No, she said, and it was not a wife speaking, but a queen. The prince is a boy, Lyanna said, and found her hands were already clenched around air. Not that prince, Rhaegar said. This one. He touched his own chest. The dreams do not permit me to sit on a chair while other men do this work. Elia stared at him until the silence in the room grew structures under itself. She looked to Lyanna. They had learned by then to ask the other woman's eyes for help when their own saw too much. Lyanna said, You are a father, like a blade sheathed. You are a husband. You are a man made into a symbol by those who cannot carry your weight and so have placed it upon you. If you go, you will go to walk in stories and freeze in them and be no help to those who must eat tomorrow. He shook his head, miserable. If I do not go, then the songs are lies. Let them be, she said. I will go in your stead. It shocked him into silence. It shocked the room into making noise. Barristan protested. Jon Arryn raised his hands in a Parson's placating. Tywin's mouth went thin. Stannis nodded, once sharply. Elia closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were full of a growing storm that would rain and then pass. "You are not going north," Rhaegar said, in the voice of a man who has found his limit and hates it. "I am," Lyanna said, in the voice of a woman who did not know she had one yet. They argued in private, as they always did when the thing mattered. He said words like duty until they sounded like excuses. She said words like faith until they sounded like wooden cups. Elia sat and let them circle, and when she spoke into the middle of the circle and turned both their faces. "Rhaegar," she said, "we did not save this city to leave it now. Go north if the realm will be better for your frostbitten fingers. I do not believe it will be. Lyanna, you were born to hear the old gods when they whisper. I do not think they whisper for you to leave your child for a winter that is not yet earned. Send a man who can be cold without learning to enjoy it." "Ben-Jen," Rhaegar said, bitter. "Ben-Jen is there already." "Then send his like," Elia said. "Find me 10 men who do not care to be sung about, and send them with good boots. Find me 2 maesters who do not think their learning ends at the boundaries of their books. Send iron. Send a message to every holdfast that we will pay in gold for dragonglass." "Pay in gold," Tywin said, which warmed him in an awful way, because it was something that coin could do, and he loved coin like a reliable old dog. "The hills will be turned out like granaries." "And send me the prince," Lyanna said suddenly, and Rhaegar's head snapped up in alarm. "Jon will go north to sit with his uncle for 1 wint. Or when he is old enough to have learned not to fall into his own fire. He will go not to throw his small weight against a wall, but to learn why men stand with their backs to it. He will come home and tell us what his bones learned, not just his eyes. He will be what he must be." Rhaegar stared at her with something like awe and something like dread. "He will be cold," he said, as if cold were a sin. "He will be human," she said, and so a second road was built alongside the first. Men went north with clumsy packs holding warmth and very old glass and a kind of belief that made even Tywin hold his peace. The watch wrote back that it was not enough, and then that it was better, and then that they could hold what they must with this repair, this extra bread, this new sentry tower where wind had eaten the old. And in the yard in King's Landing, Jon learned to fall harder and to get up quicker, because when you are not told you are the prince that was promised, you can afford to be simply a boy who learns. Years after, when winter had truly bitten and then, exhausted, had let go, and when the blue winter roses Lyanna had tucked into stone above a desert had become a story told by grooms to girls who thought romance was a horse ridden standing up, a woman with streaks of silver in her hair and scars on her shins sat with another woman whose smile had grown lines around it, and whose laughter had become an herb known to heal a dozen small aches. They were in a garden above a city that had burned only in imagination. Their children were men and women who had learned to joke and to swear and to plan. Their husbands were kings and counselors and older, softer things. Their brother wrote from a wall that was not a myth that the night is long, yes, but sometimes blocks of it are filled with scratching and then dawn comes. "Do you ever regret it?" Elia asked, eyes on the slow gold of afternoon. "The second crown? The first was always yours, somewhere. The second was a country we made with 2 maps. I regret every time I did not speak when I should," Lyanna said. "I regret every name I learned only after its bearer died. I regret one winter in which I bled and told no one how afraid I was of the silence that followed." Elia took her hand. "I regret only that I did not meet you when we were both 15 and stupid," she said. "We would have terrified men into building roads by ourselves." Lyanna laughed. A boy ran past, not a boy. A man with a scar under his chin and a grin slit wide, his hair still unwilling to lie down. Jon waved over his shoulder and called, "Mother, Aunt, do not decide anything without me." And they pretended to consider deciding everything in a hurry. Rhaegar came into the garden with a handful of letters and a face full of benign exasperation. He looked older in ways that pleased him, lines from squinting into sun on roads, a scar he had not sought and then had not wasted the lesson of. He handed out the news like figs. There was a report from the Reach about pears heavy as helmets. There was a report from Pike about a lord who had not rebelled in 3 years and was held up among his people as an eccentric. There were notes from across the narrow sea that could have been threats or opportunities. They handled them the same way at first and only later chose. There was a letter from Ben-Jen with a crude drawing of a very ugly snowman whom he claimed was Jon. "We should go north next year," Rhaegar said. "We have said it for years. We should go and let the old gods see what the city has done to us." "The old gods do not care," Lyanna said fondly. "They are interested in the long game, Rhaegar. They are counting the rings under bark and waiting to see if we can keep the white parts of our hair tied back out of our soup." "Then let us go anyway," Elia said. "I wish to complain about the cold with fresh fervor." They smiled at each other and at the city and at the idea of snow. Somewhere far away at the edge of winter, wolves moved through trees and did not mind being seen by men now and then. Somewhere far away at the edge of summer, a girl shot an arrow through a ring tossed in the air by her own brown hand and laughed until her mother told her to come in and wash. In the yard, the prince sparred with a golden-haired knight and did not lose more often than he won. When he did, he learned something that lasted him longer than a bruise. Peace is a hum. If you place your ear to the stones, you can hear it. It does not promise. It does not move men to weep in public. It holds, and because it holds, other things are possible. Apologies, reforms, small kindnesses, choices made not in terror. The realm did not know what it had asked for when it asked to be saved from fire. It had asked to be asked again, every season, if it still wished to be itself. Rhaegar learned to ask. Lyanna learned to require an answer. Elia learned to translate both into deeds. Long later, when Jon stood at the edge of the world and watched a wind walk upright and dared to sing into it with a voice that had not yet broken and found the wind listening, he would think of his mother's hand on a bench of stone and his aunt's laugh as a bird's wing brushed her ear and his father's blood running in stubborn flower shapes upon a throne room floor. He would think, "We are what we grow, and we grew this." And in a wild place inside a mountain, blue roses went on opening themselves to heat they had not been designed to stand and did not wither. They held their color. They threw their perfume against stone. They told anyone who bent near enough that stubbornness can be a country if you plant it where the wind always thinks it will win.